The FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center arrived at Sunset Pines Luxury Senior Resort on a Tuesday morning with federal warrants. The facility administrator went pale when agents announced they were investigating wire fraud and elder financial exploitation. By Wednesday, the bank had frozen 12 accounts. By Thursday, the activities director was in federal custody. By the following Monday, agents had identified 37 victims across 6 states who'd wired a combined $4.3 million to fake romantic partners. By the end of the investigation, everyone knew the name Carol Bennett, not as the quiet woman in the wheelchair who spent her afternoons by the ocean view windows, but as the retired bank vice president who had spent 26 years investigating financial fraud and had just exposed the most sophisticated romance scam operation targeting assisted living facilities in the country. It all started with 17 words she wasn't supposed to hear. Mrs. Bennett wired another $50,000 to her fiancé today. Your daughter did great setting her up. She's lonely and rich, perfect mark, and her family never visits anyway. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video for your support. Thank you for subscribing. Carol Bennett woke at 7:23 a.m. on a Thursday in March to the sound of waves against the North Carolina coast. Sunset Pines sat on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic, marketed as luxury senior living with ocean views and resort amenities. The morning light came soft and golden through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her suite. Not a room, they called them, suites here, as if the word itself justified the monthly cost that consumed most of her retirement savings. She transferred from bed to wheelchair with practiced efficiency. The accident had been 4 years ago. Distracted driver, icy road, her car spun into a guardrail at 60 miles per hour. She'd been lucky, the doctors said. Spinal injury, but no paralysis, just permanent nerve damage that made walking unstable and painful. The wheelchair was practical, safe, allowed her to maintain independence. The room smelled like the expensive lavender sachets Emily had placed in the drawers. Emily, her daughter, who worked here as activities director, who'd found this place, who'd convinced Carol that living here would be so much better than that big empty house in Raleigh, Mom. You'll have people around, activities, safety, and I'll be here every day. Carol wheeled to the window, looked out at the ocean. March in coastal North Carolina meant variable weather. Some days mild and beautiful, others cold and stormy. Today looked promising. Clear skies, gentle waves. She could see other residents on the terrace below, having breakfast in the sunshine, enjoying the resort atmosphere that justified the $8,500 monthly fee. On her desk sat her laptop. She'd insisted on bringing it, insisted on maintaining internet access, despite Emily's suggestion that maybe you should take a break from screens, Mom, enjoy real life. Carol had spent 26 years as a bank vice president specializing in fraud prevention. She'd investigated everything from check-kiting schemes to complex money laundering operations. She'd testified in federal court 17 times. She'd trained FBI agents on recognizing financial fraud patterns. Retiring hadn't changed her instinct to spot irregularities, to notice patterns that didn't fit, to question transactions that seemed suspicious. She'd been at Sunset Pines for 9 months now. Emily visited daily, perks of working here. Always cheerful, always encouraging Mom to engage more with activities, to make friends, to put yourself out there. You're too young to just sit alone. Carol had tried. She attended the book club, though the selection skewed heavily toward inspirational memoirs rather than the mysteries and thrillers she preferred. She went to the gardening group, though her wheelchair made actual gardening difficult. She joined the technology class Emily organized, teaching other residents how to use computers and smartphones and social media. That last one had been interesting. Carol had watched Emily teach elderly residents, mostly widows, mostly wealthy, how to create Facebook profiles, how to use dating websites, how to communicate with online friends. Emily framed it as staying connected in the modern world, encouraging residents to explore new relationships, to not let age stop you from finding companionship. Several residents had become very enthusiastic about their online connections. Mrs. Harrison from Suite 12 talked constantly about James, a doctor who'd lost his wife and was serving with Doctors Without Borders in Syria. Mrs. Chen from Suite 8 had met Richard, a businessman working on a construction project in Nigeria. Mrs. Patterson from Suite 15 was corresponding with Michael, a military officer deployed overseas who sent her poetry and talked about their future together. All of them were wealthy widows. All of them were lonely. All of them had met their romantic interests through websites Emily had helped them set up. And all of them, Carol had noticed, were sending money. She'd overheard Mrs. Harrison on the phone with her bank, authorizing a wire transfer. James needs help getting medical supplies to refugee camps, she'd explained to Carol afterward. The organization has bureaucratic delays, so he's covering costs personally until they reimburse him. I'm happy to help. Mrs. Chen had mentioned sending money to Richard for unexpected customs fees on the Nigerian project. Mrs. Patterson wired funds to Michael for emergency leave paperwork so he could come visit her. Carol recognized the patterns. 26 years of investigating fraud had trained her to spot romance scams. The classic scripts, the urgent requests for money, the elaborate stories designed to extract funds from vulnerable, lonely people. Doctors Without Borders, Nigerian construction, projects, military deployment paperwork, all standard romance scam narratives, but these were sophisticated scams, well-researched, targeting specific demographics. The scammers knew these women were widowed, wealthy, socially isolated. They knew exactly which emotional buttons to push, and Emily was teaching them how to be vulnerable to it. Carol had tried raising concerns with Emily. "Honey, I think some of these residents might be getting scammed. The online relationships they're developing. The money requests. It's textbook romance fraud." Emily had laughed, patted Carol's hand. "Mom, you're being paranoid. People can find real connections online. Not everything is a scam. You spent too many years seeing fraud everywhere. I spent 26 years recognizing fraud because I know what it looks like. These are consenting adults making their own choices. We can't infantilize them by assuming they can't manage their own relationships." Carol had dropped it, but she'd kept watching, kept noticing, kept documenting in her mind the way she'd documented suspicious transactions for 2 decades. The breakfast cart arrived at 8 a.m. Sunset Pines offered restaurant-style dining, but some residents preferred room service. Carol usually ate in the main dining room, better to observe people, maintain social connections, avoid the isolation that made elderly people vulnerable. But today she took breakfast in her room. She had work to do. She opened her laptop, navigated to the bookmarked folder she'd created. Suspicious activity. Inside were screenshots, notes, dates, and times. Mrs. Harrison had wired $15,000 2 weeks ago, another $12,000 last week. Mrs. Chen had sent $20,000 for customs fees, then another $8,000 for storage costs. Mrs. Patterson had wired $25,000 for Michael's emergency leave, followed by $18,000 for medical expenses when he was supposedly injured. Total, $98,000 in 6 weeks, all from 3 residents, all to romantic interests they'd met online after Emily's technology classes. Carol pulled up the fraud training materials she'd developed during her banking career. Romance scams followed predictable patterns: rapid emotional intimacy, elaborate backstories involving isolation or hardship, escalating financial requests, always framed as temporary or urgent, victims isolated from family who might question the relationship. These scams hit every marker, but the sophistication troubled her. The scammers had detailed knowledge about these specific women, their finances, their vulnerabilities. That level of intelligence gathering suggested inside information. Someone was feeding the scammers detailed profiles of potential victims. Carol thought about Emily's technology classes, the encouragement to share personal information online, the assistants setting up dating profiles. She thought about how Emily always knew which residents were widowed, lonely, financially comfortable, As activities director, Emily had access to everything: resident, files, family contact information, financial disclosures required for admission. Carol felt cold. Surely not. Surely Emily wouldn't. She stopped that thought. 26 years of fraud investigation had taught her that anyone could be a criminal if the incentive was right. Family relationships didn't exempt people from suspicion. In fact, family often had the best access, the most trust, the easiest path to exploitation. She needed more information, needed to confirm or disprove her suspicion that Emily was involved. That afternoon, Carol attended the technology workshop in the common room. Emily was demonstrating how to use video chat to 12 residents, most of them elderly women. "It's wonderful for staying connected with grandchildren," Emily said, her smile bright and warm. "But it's also great for new relationships. Several of our residents have found wonderful companionship through online connections. Mrs. Harrison, would you like to share about James?" Mrs. Harrison beamed. "James is amazing. He's a doctor helping refugees in Syria. We video chat when he has internet access. He's hoping to visit soon. We're planning to get married." "That's beautiful," Emily said. "See? Technology isn't scary. It opens up possibilities for connection and love at any age." Carol watched her daughter's face, looking for signs of deception, calculation, guilt. She saw only what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm, warm support for residents' happiness. Maybe Carol was wrong. Maybe her fraud investigator's paranoia was seeing patterns that didn't exist. After the class, Carol approached Mrs. Harrison. "I'm so happy you found someone special," she said. "How did you and James meet?" "On secondchancelove.com. Emily helped me set up my profile. She's so good at helping us navigate these sites, making sure we're safe, you know." "Has Emily met James? Through video chat, I mean?" "Oh, yes, she was there during one of our video calls, said she wanted to make sure I knew how to use the technology properly. She said James seemed very genuine, very caring. It was reassuring to have her approval." Carol felt her investigator instincts activate. Emily had been present during a video call with the supposed James, had seen him, interacted with him. If James was a scammer, Emily would have recognized the signs, unless she was part of the operation. "Has James asked you for money?" Carol asked gently. Mrs. Harrison's expression shifted, defensive. "He needed help with medical supplies. It's temporary. The organization will reimburse him. I was happy to help someone doing such important work." "Of course," Carol said. "I'm just concerned. As a former banker, I know romance scams are common. I'd hate to see you hurt." "James isn't a scammer." Mrs. Harrison's voice was cold now. "I understand you think you're helping, Carol, but you're being insulting. Not every relationship is fraudulent. Emily says you're suspicious of everything because of your old job. Maybe you should try trusting people." She wheeled away, clearly offended. Carol sat alone, troubled. Emily had told residents Carol was suspicious of everything, preemptively discrediting her concerns. That evening, Carol was in the library, a beautiful room with ocean views and comfortable seating, rarely used except by her and 2 other residents. She was reading by the window when she heard voices from the hallway just outside. The library door was open about 6 inches. Emily's voice. "Mrs. Bennett wired another $50,000 today." Carol froze. Mrs. Bennett was her. She hadn't wired any money. A male voice responded. Greg Matthews, the facility administrator. "Perfect. That's 50 from Bennett, 20 from Harrison this morning, 15 from Chen yesterday. Your daughter did great setting her up. She's lonely and rich, perfect mark, and her family never visits anyway." Carol's heart hammered. They were talking about her. Emily had set her up. Emily was involved. Emily's voice again. "Mom's stubborn, though. She was a fraud investigator. She might figure it out. We need to move carefully." "The profile we created is solid," Greg said. "Colonel David Morrison, retired Marine, widowed, living in Dubai for consulting work. We used real photos from a dead officer's memorial page. She won't reverse image search them. The emails are professional, romantic, but not pushy. She'll fall for it like the others. I introduced them through the Veterans Connections site yesterday, Emily said. She seemed interested. He's her type. Military background like Dad, distinguished, intelligent. Give it 2 weeks, then start the money requests. Medical emergency, stuck overseas, needs funds wired. Your commission is 20% of whatever we extract, Greg said. You've been our best recruiter, identifying targets, grooming them, providing detailed profiles to our partners overseas. Your mother might be worth $200,000 if we play it right. They moved down the hallway, voices fading. Carol sat in absolute stillness, her mind processing information with the cold, analytical precision of 26 years investigating financial crimes. Her daughter was running a romance scam operation. Emily was identifying wealthy, lonely residents, gathering intelligence, providing detailed profiles to scammers overseas. Emily had created a fake romantic interest specifically for Carol. Colonel David Morrison, designed to exploit Carol's widowhood, her military family background, her isolation, and they'd already claimed Carol had wired $50,000, which meant they'd either forged her signature on wire transfer authorizations or had accessed her accounts directly. Carol wheeled to her room, locked the door, opened her laptop with shaking hands. She logged into her bank accounts, the checking, savings, investment accounts she'd transferred to a local bank when moving to Sunset Pines. Her primary checking account showed a wire transfer from 2 days ago, $50,000 to an account in the Philippines. Authorization signature, hers, or a very good forgery. She checked her email, nothing in sent items about wire transfers. Checked her phone, no confirmation texts from the bank. Someone had authorized this transfer without her knowledge, forged her signature on the paperwork. Carol had investigated fraud for 26 years. Now she was a victim of fraud orchestrated by her own daughter. She closed her eyes, took 3 slow breaths, forced herself past the emotional reaction. Victims got emotional. Investigators got methodical. She needed to be an investigator now, not a victim. First, stop the bleeding. She called her bank, reported the unauthorized transfer, requested immediate freeze on all accounts, and new authorization protocols requiring in-person verification for any transactions over $1,000. Second, document everything. She opened a new file on her laptop, began writing down everything she'd witnessed. Mrs. Harrison's wire transfers, Mrs. Chen's payments, Mrs. Patterson's repeated transfers, the conversation she'd just overheard, the fake Colonel Morrison profile created specifically for her. Third, gather evidence. She needed proof of the larger operation, who else was targeted, how much total money was stolen, who was running the overseas portion of the scam, how deep Emily's involvement went. Fourth, report to authorities. This was federal wire fraud, elder financial exploitation, organized crime. The FBI needed to be involved, but she needed solid evidence first. Accusations without proof would be dismissed, especially coming from an elderly woman in a wheelchair accusing her own daughter. She'd seen it before. Families claiming exploitation, adult children defending themselves by questioning the accuser's competency, investigators uncertain who to believe. Carol needed irrefutable evidence. Over the next 3 days, Carol became a covert operation. She attended activities, smiled at Emily, acted normally while gathering intelligence. She was in the dining room when Mrs. Harrison mentioned another wire transfer, $18,000 for James's emergency medical evacuation. She was at the book club when Mrs. Patterson talked about sending $12,000 to help Michael with family emergency expenses. She started befriending the targets, learning their stories. Mrs. Chen had wired over $60,000 total. Mrs. Patterson had sent $75,000. Mrs. Harrison was approaching $90,000. And there were others. Mrs. Wilson from Suite 3, Mrs. Rodriguez from Suite 19, Miss Thompson from Suite 22. All wealthy widows, all in online relationships with men working overseas, all sending substantial amounts of money. Carol estimated at least 8 active victims, collectively sending hundreds of thousands of dollars. On the 4th evening, Carol received an email from Colonel David Morrison. The profile was good. Professional photo of a distinguished-looking man in his 70s, military bearing, kind eyes. The email was well-written, charming but not effusive, mentioning his wife's death 3 years ago, his current consulting work in Dubai, his love of classical music and sailing, interests that match Carol's own profile on the Veterans Connections website she hadn't remembered joining. Emily must have created Carol's profile, populated it with information from conversations they'd had, made Carol visible to the fake colonel. The email asked if Carol would like to video chat. I know it's old-fashioned, but I prefer seeing someone's face when we talk. There's something about real conversation, even through a screen, that feels more genuine than endless typing. It was a smart approach. Video chat would make him seem more real, build trust, accelerate the emotional connection. Carol replied, "I'd enjoy that. Tomorrow evening works well for me." She needed to see this through, needed to document how the scam operated. The next evening, Carol positioned her laptop for the video call. At 7:00 p.m., Colonel Morrison appeared on screen. The same distinguished man from the photos, sitting in what looked like a well-appointed office, speaking with cultured accent and genuine warmth. "Mrs. Bennett, it's wonderful to finally see you. Emily spoke so highly of you." There it was. Confirmation Emily had connected them, had spoken to this man, or whoever was playing Colonel Morrison. They talked for 30 minutes. He was charming, intelligent, asked thoughtful questions about her life, her career, her late husband, shared stories about his own military service, his wife's death, his current work, everything designed to build connection, establish commonality, create emotional intimacy. Carol played along, responded warmly, asked questions of her own, but she was analyzing everything. The background visible on his video. Generic office, could be anywhere. The slight lag in his responses, suggesting the video might be pre-recorded or routed through multiple servers. Small inconsistencies in his military service story. He claimed to be a Marine colonel, but used Army terminology. This was a skilled scammer, but not perfect. Carol had interviewed enough fraudsters to recognize the tiny tells. At the end of the call, Colonel Morrison said, "I hope we can talk again soon. It's rare to meet someone who understands military life, who shares my interests. I feel like we have real potential for connection." "I'd like that," Carol said truthfully. She would like another call, another chance to gather evidence. Over the next 2 weeks, Carol and Colonel Morrison had 4 more video chats. He was building the relationship carefully, professionally. No money requests yet. That would come later, after emotional investment was established. Meanwhile, Carol was conducting her own investigation. She'd contacted an old colleague from her banking days, Mark Stevens, who now worked private security doing fraud investigation. She sent him everything she'd documented, the resident profiles, the wire transfer patterns, screenshots of the Colonel Morrison emails, recordings of their video chats. Mark called her back 3 days later. "Carol, this is significant. The operation is sophisticated. They're using layered money transfers through multiple countries, making it hard to trace. But I've identified the pattern. The money goes to accounts in the Philippines, then redistributes to various locations. The video chat technology suggests they're using deep fake or pre-recorded video composited with live audio. Colonel Morrison doesn't exist. They're using a deceased officer's identity and digitally manipulating his photos." "Can you trace who's running it?" Carol asked. "Working on it. But I can tell you that someone inside your facility is definitely feeding them information. The level of detail they have about residents, financial status, family situations, vulnerabilities, that's insider intelligence. My daughter Emily is the activities director. I overheard her discussing the operation with the facility administrator." Silence on the line. Then, "Carol, I'm sorry. I'm sorry." "I need evidence that will hold up in federal court," Carol said, her voice steady. "Emotion doesn't help, evidence does. I'm coordinating with the FBI. They're interested. This might be connected to a larger romance scam network they've been tracking. They'll want to interview you." 2 days later, FBI agent Sarah Chen called Carol. They spoke for 90 minutes, Carol providing every detail she'd documented. Agent Chen was impressed. "Mrs. Bennett, most victims don't recognize they're being scammed until after they've lost significant money. You identified it early and gathered substantial evidence. Your background in fraud investigation is evident." "What happens next?" Carol asked. "We need to build the case before moving in. Can you continue the relationship with Colonel Morrison? Let the scam play out so we can document the money request, trace the funds, identify everyone involved?" "I can do that," Carol said. "I've been investigating fraud for 26 years. I know how to run a sting operation." Over the next 3 weeks, Carol let Colonel Morrison deepen their relationship. They video chatted 3 times per week. He sent thoughtful emails daily. He talked about visiting, about building a future together, about how unexpected and wonderful it was to find connection at this stage of life. And then, at the 4-week mark, he mentioned a problem. Medical emergency. His sister in Dubai had been in an accident, needed surgery. Insurance wouldn't cover it. He was short on funds because his consulting payment had been delayed by bureaucratic issues. Could Carol possibly help? Just temporary, he'd pay her back immediately when his payment cleared. The amount, $35,000, classic scam escalation. Test the waters with a significant request framed as urgent and temporary. Carol expressed concern, sympathy. "Of course I want to help, David. Let me talk to my bank about wire transfers." She contacted Agent Chen immediately. "They've made the money request. Are we ready to move?" "We're coordinating with North Carolina authorities and international partners. When you send the money, we'll trace it in real time, identify all the accounts and individuals involved. But, Carol, we need you to go through with the transfer. Actually send the money so we can track it." "I understand. I'll authorize the wire tomorrow." "We'll have your money back," Agent Chen assured her. "This is federal crime. We can seize assets, recover funds. You won't lose anything." "I'm not worried about the money," Carol said. "I'm worried about all the other victims who've already lost hundreds of thousands of dollars because my daughter targeted them." The next morning, Carol went to the bank in person, authorized the $35,000 wire transfer to the account Colonel Morrison had specified. The bank manager, who knew Carol's history and had been briefed by the FBI, processed the transfer while documenting every detail. The money moved. Philippines, then Singapore, then several European accounts, then back to the United States into an account registered to a shell company in Delaware. The FBI tracked every step, identified every account holder, every intermediary, and they identified the primary account where funds ultimately landed, a business account registered to Greg Matthews and Emily Bennett, co-owners of Senior Life Enhancement Consulting Services. Carol's daughter had been running the scam operation, using her position to identify targets, partnering with overseas scammers, collecting 20% commission on every dollar stolen from vulnerable elderly people she was supposed to be helping. The FBI arrested Greg Matthews and Emily Bennett on a Thursday morning while Carol sat in her suite, overlooking the ocean. She heard the commotion, the raised voices, the sound of federal agents executing warrants. She didn't go watch. She sat by her window, looking at the water, thinking about the daughter she'd raised, the girl who'd been smart, creative, always wanting more than she had. The teenager who'd resented their middle-class life, wanted luxury and status. The young woman who'd complained that Carol and her father didn't understand ambition. The adult who'd found a career in senior care but apparently saw it as an opportunity to exploit rather than serve. 26 years of investigating fraud had shown Carol that criminals came from all backgrounds, all families, but she'd never imagined her own daughter would become one. Agent Chen came to Carol's suite an hour later. "We've arrested Matthews and your daughter along with 3 overseas partners we identified through the money trail. We're in the process of contacting all identified victims. There were 12 at this facility, another 23 at 3 other facilities where Emily had previously worked. Total estimated theft, $4.3 million over 3 years. Carol closed her eyes. 12 victims here. 23 others. Millions of dollars stolen from elderly people who'd trusted Emily, who'd believed the relationships were real. What about the money? Carol asked. We've frozen the accounts and initiated asset seizure proceedings. Most victims will recover the majority of their losses. Your $35,000 is already back in your account. It never actually went to the scammers since we intercepted it. What happens to Emily? Federal charges, wire fraud, elder financial exploitation, conspiracy, money laundering. She's looking at 15 to 20 years. Carol nodded slowly. Justice, but no satisfaction. Over the following months, Carol cooperated fully with the prosecution. She testified at grand jury hearings, provided expert analysis of the fraud schemes, explained how romance scams operated, and how Emily had exploited her position to enable them. The trial was difficult. Emily's defense attorney tried to claim Carol was a vengeful mother, angry that her daughter had put her in a care facility. But the evidence was overwhelming. Emails, financial records, testimony from overseas scammers who'd cooperated for reduced sentences, Carol's meticulous documentation. Emily was convicted on all counts. Sentencing: 18 years in federal prison. Carol attended the sentencing hearing. Emily looked at her once, across the courtroom, expression unreadable. Carol looked back, neither forgiveness nor anger in her face. Just the exhaustion of someone who'd spent months investigating her own daughter's crimes. The judge asked if Carol wanted to make a victim impact statement. She wheeled to the microphone. "My daughter stole from me, but that's not the greatest harm," Carol said. She stole from elderly people who trusted her, people who were lonely, who'd lost their life partners, who believed they'd found genuine connection. She weaponized their loneliness. She turned their hope into her profit. That's the real crime. I can recover money. These victims will never fully recover their trust. After the trial, Carol moved to a different facility, a nonprofit organization with transparent finances and rigorous oversight. She brought her laptop, her wheelchair, her ocean view preferences. She also brought new purpose. The FBI asked her to consult on elder fraud cases. State banking authorities wanted her to develop training programs on recognizing romance scams. Senior advocacy organizations invited her to speak about protecting elderly people from financial exploitation. At 75 years old, Carol became an expert witness, a consultant, a trainer, a voice for vulnerable elderly people targeted by scammers. She gave lectures at banks about recognizing fraudulent wire transfers. She trained care facility staff on identifying romance scam warning signs. She developed screening protocols to help families protect elderly relatives from financial exploitation, and she testified at trials, not just Emily's, but dozens of others. Prosecutors loved her, a retired bank fraud investigator who could explain complex financial crimes in language jurors understood, who had credibility that couldn't be shaken, who'd personally experienced what she was describing. On a morning in early fall, Carol sat by her window in the new facility, looking out at a different stretch of North Carolina coast. Her laptop was open, reviewing case files for her next consultation with the FBI. Her phone showed missed calls from her son Robert, Emily's brother, who'd maintained contact despite everything, who brought his children to visit monthly, who was trying to navigate loving both his mother and his incarcerated sister. Carol had told him, "Love her if you want. I don't judge that. But don't ever minimize what she did. The people she hurt were real. The harm was real. Love and accountability aren't mutually exclusive." She thought about Emily sometimes, wondered if 18 years in federal prison would change her, if she'd ever truly understand the harm she'd caused. Carol doubted it. Emily had shown no remorse at trial, only anger at being caught. Maybe someday. But Carol couldn't invest hope in maybe. What she could invest in was protecting other people from becoming victims. Every training session she gave, every protocol she developed, every case she helped prosecute, those were real victories. Carol Bennett was 75 years old, living in a care facility with mobility limitations and all the practical dependencies of age. But she was not vulnerable. She was not a victim. She was a fraud investigator who'd spent 26 years protecting people's money and was now spending her retirement protecting people's trust. Some things she'd learned you never really retired from: the instinct to recognize patterns, the refusal to accept exploitation, the bone-deep certainty that trust was sacred and those who violated it needed to be held accountable. She'd raised a daughter who'd forgotten those lessons, but Carol remembered them, and she'd spend whatever time she had left making sure other people's daughters and sons and caregivers and administrators understood that elderly people weren't marks to be exploited. They were people deserving dignity, respect, and protection from those who'd prey on their loneliness. Carol adjusted her wheelchair, opened the next case file, and continued the work she'd done for 26 years, just with a different set of victims to protect and a far more personal understanding of what they'd lost.